My name is John, and if you had told me a week ago that I would die, meet Jesus, and come back to tell people about it, I would have laughed, not in a cruel way, just in that half-skeptical, half-tired tone most grown men develop after life has knocked them around a bit. I'm in my 40s, I work hard, pay my bills, keep my head down. I've never been the spiritual type, church, religion, faith. Those were things I respected from a distance but never got involved in. I figured as long as I wasn't hurting anyone, I was doing all right. Life's short, you get what you get, and then you're gone. That's how I saw it most days. My head was filled with numbers, deadlines, repairs, to-do lists. I never really made time to think about the big questions. I had a vague sense that maybe there was something out there, but I didn't chase it. I didn't pray. I didn't read any holy books. If I'm being honest, I thought faith was a comfort for people who needed it. I didn't think I needed it. I had a roof over my head, a steady job, and just enough chaos to remind me I was still alive. I didn't have time for God. Life was too loud, too full, too real. And then one ordinary afternoon, everything changed. I don't even remember what the weather was like or what I ate that morning. It was just another day. But when it started, when the ground moved, I knew something was wrong in a way I had never known before. It started subtle, like the tremble of a passing truck, and then it grew in seconds. The sound shifted from distant to deafening. The ground beneath me wasn't solid anymore. It roared and groaned, like something ancient waking up. My feet couldn't find footing. The walls cracked, glass shattered, people screamed. There's something primal that kicks in when the earth turns against you. You don't think, you just run. I remember bolting out of the building, barely aware of the people around me, just dodging debris, ducking falling signs and snapping wires. The street outside was chaos, dust rising, people crying out for help, others frozen in place too, shocked to move. The ground shook with such violence that it felt like it was trying to tear the whole world apart. I couldn't tell if it lasted 10 seconds or 10 minutes. Time broke apart with the concrete. It all bled together. I tried to make it to an open area. That's what they say you're supposed to do, right? Get away from buildings, from anything that can fall. I ran down an alley, and that's when it happened. Something, maybe a wall, maybe part of a roof, collapsed. I remember the sound first, a low, deep crack that came from somewhere behind me. Then wait, sudden, complete wait, and then nothing, no pain, no sound, just nothing. At first I thought maybe I had blacked out, but I could still think, I could still feel, just not with a body. It's hard to explain. One moment, I was surrounded by noise and panic and breaking stone. And the next, I was floating not up in the clouds or into some mystical tunnel, but above the wreckage. I could see it all, the street. The dust my body crushed, still lifeless beneath the debris. It was the strangest sensation, being above myself, completely conscious, but no longer part of the chaos. There was no fear, no confusion, just a quiet, weightless awareness that I had stepped out of time. I wasn't dreaming, I wasn't unconscious, I was dead. It took me a moment to even accept that. My first instinct was denial. This can't be real, I'm just in shock. But I looked down, and there was no arguing with what I saw. My chest wasn't moving, my limbs were twisted, people were shouting, pulling at the wreckage, trying to reach others. But no one was looking for me. I knew in that moment that I was gone. And somehow I wasn't panicking. That's what really shook me. There was a peace I didn't understand, a stillness that didn't belong to this world. It was like stepping out of a raging storm into a room where everything was clear and calm. Then something began to pull me, not physically but spiritually, like a current in the air, drawing me away from the place I had just left. I didn't resist it, I couldn't. It wasn't forcing me, it was inviting me, and I followed. What came next is something I still don't have the right words for. It was like crossing into another reality. Not a dream, not a fantasy, but a realm more real than the one I had known my entire life. The colors were deeper, the silence was alive. There was no wait, no time, no fear, just awareness and presence. I don't know how long I floated there between life and something else, but I could feel something waiting ahead, a presence holy, pure, intense, not distant, not cold, but impossibly powerful. I wasn't scared, but I was in awe. I hadn't believed in heaven or angels or any of that. I had lived as though death was the end, but now I knew it wasn't. I began to sense something approaching, not with footsteps or sound, but with presence. It was like light moving through light, yet I hadn't seen anything yet, but whatever was coming, it knew me. I could feel it searching me, not to harm me, but to reveal me, and part of me already knew who it was. I didn't want to say it out loud, I wasn't ready to believe it, but my spirit knew long before my thoughts caught up. It was him, Jesus, not the version I had seen in pictures or heard about in passing conversations. Not the symbol or the myth, the real Jesus. And he was coming not in anger, not in wrath, but with a presence that made every part of me aware of just how small I was and just how loved I was. I thought dying in an earthquake would be the end of my story. I had no idea it was just the beginning. Everything felt suspended, like the world had hit pause, and I was floating somewhere between reality and something else entirely. I had no body, no voice, no heartbeat, but I was still me. The panic of the earthquake, the deafening sound of concrete fracturing, the screams, it was all behind me. Now what remained was silence, not the kind you experience late at night or in the woods or in a quiet house. This was deeper, absolute, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you've stepped into eternity without permission. I hovered above the street where it had all happened. Dust still hung in the air like a slow-moving cloud. People were staggering around, some helping others. Some just crying, a few were screaming names. Others prayed, some were just frozen eyes, wide lips, trembling, still holding on to walls or each other, trying to make sense of it all. The earth had stopped shaking, but the fear hadn't left. It was all over their faces. There were buildings with chunks missing, cars tipped sideways, electric wires hanging loose. I saw all of it clear, detailed like I was watching from some elevated place just a few feet above the chaos, yet untouched by it. It was the strangest thing I've ever experienced. Seeing your own body from the outside, I was buried halfway under the rubble. My legs were completely covered by debris. My arm was twisted at an angle that no living body could manage. My eyes were closed, my chest unmoving, just still lifeless. That was me. Well, it used to be, and yet somehow I didn't feel panic. I didn't scream. I didn't even try to rush back or re-enter my body. Like you see in movies, there was no impulse to go back, just this strange, aching awareness that I was no longer part of the world I had always lived in. It's hard to describe the emotions of that moment. Not sadness, not fear, just stunned acceptance, a quiet recognition that something massive had happened. And there was no going back the moment I acknowledged I was dead. It was like something in me released. I wasn't tied to my body anymore. It felt like taking off an old coat. That body was no longer mine. It had served its purpose, and now I had stepped out of it. Time didn't feel linear anymore. I don't know how long I floated there, just watching the aftermath, minutes, hours. Everything felt still and yet full of movement. Like I was outside of time, watching it unfold from a higher perspective. I saw someone lean down and try to check for a pulse on someone nearby. Not me, but another victim. I noticed the way people were holding hands, helping strangers. I saw acts of kindness I would have missed in the rush of survival if I'd still been alive. There was something incredibly raw and human about that moment. People stripped down to their most real selves, desperate and wide open. No filters, no pretenses, just raw humanity. And yet I wasn't part of it. I was watching but not belonging. I didn't feel rejected or unwanted. It was just clear to me I had moved beyond something, and I knew deep down this wasn't the end, not even close. That's when I felt the pull. It wasn't physical. It wasn't like something grabbed me or pushed me. It was more like gravity had reversed, but not down or up, inward. I felt a magnetic draw deep into something beyond the physical world. I wasn't afraid of it. It felt natural, like a current that knew exactly where to take me. I began to move, not flying, not floating in the air, but being carried through what I couldn't say. The environment around me shifted. The sights and sounds of the world below began to fade, like turning down the volume and dimming the lights at the same time. And then I was somewhere else. I didn't step into heaven. Not yet. What I entered first was something in between, a realm of stillness, of complete awareness. I couldn't see walls or ceilings or landscapes, but I felt everything. The space around me was alive yet peaceful. It didn't pulse or move in any physical sense, but it had a presence, like the atmosphere was aware of me and welcomed me. I didn't hear voices, but I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by something greater, something intelligent, something holy. I could feel my thoughts more clearly than ever before. Everything in my mind was exposed but not judged. Every memory, every intention, every moment of my life was somehow open and held up to the light. It didn't feel like I was being interrogated or interrogating myself. It was just truth, honest, undeniable truth. I had no way to fake anything in that place. And strangely, I didn't want to. There was no need for excuses, no room for lies. And that's when I felt it. His presence, it started as a warmth in the distance, but quickly grew into something massive, something personal, wholly beautiful. And as he drew near, I realized the stillness was not emptiness. It was the pause before a meeting, a sacred hush, before something eternal steps into view. Something, or rather someone, was coming, and though I hadn't seen him yet, every part of me already knew who it was. Jesus, he was coming not as a figure on a cross, not as a word in a book, but as truth itself. And in that moment, every belief I didn't have, every doubt I ever carried, every wall I had built, none of it mattered because his presence was stronger than my disbelief. His reality was bigger than my questions. I thought death would be terrifying. I thought it would be dark, cold, and empty. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of something far more real than life had ever been. And now something greater than death itself was about to meet me face to face. I didn't see him walk toward me. There were no footsteps, no form slowly coming into view. From the distance, he was just suddenly there. One moment the space was still and weightless, and the next it was filled with a presence so powerful, so consuming that everything else faded. I couldn't look away. Not because I was forced, but because nothing else in existence could possibly matter more than him. He didn't need to introduce himself. He didn't say his name, and yet I knew instantly, without a shred of doubt, it was Jesus. Not the Jesus I'd vaguely imagined in passing thoughts, not the painting or the movie version, not the name people casually toss into conversations or arguments. This was him, the real Jesus, the one who holds all of time in his hands, the one I never believed I'd meet, the one I thought belonged only to other people's stories. And yet here he was, standing before me, not with judgment in his eyes, but with something much more terrifying and beautiful: truth. It's hard to describe what his presence felt like, because there's nothing on earth to compare it to. It wasn't just bright, it was alive. Light poured off him, but not like sunlight or fire. It was a light that moved with intention, that carried weight, that went through me instead of just around me. And with that light came a love so overwhelming, so pure, that I felt every wall I had ever built inside me crumble. I couldn't hide anything from him. Not my pride, not my doubts, not my excuses. He saw it all. He had always seen it all. And yet I didn't feel condemned. I felt known. I felt known, fully, deeply, uncomfortably known, standing before him. I didn't feel the need to defend myself. I didn't want to explain why I had stayed away from faith, why I thought religion was just noise, or why I had chosen my own logic over his truth. All of that felt ridiculous in his presence, like trying to argue with the ocean, using a cup of water. He knew everything about me already. He had seen every moment, every motive, every time I turned away, every time I shut him out. And yet he loved me. I could feel it, not in a vague way, not as some general idea, but as a personal reality. His love wasn't soft or sentimental. It was strong, fierce. It cut through every excuse I had ever made and went straight to the parts of me I didn't even understand about myself. I fell to my knees, not because he forced me to, but because I couldn't stand in front of that kind of holiness. My spirit collapsed under the weight of it, not from fear, but from awe, from the sudden awareness that I was in the presence of someone who had created me, pursued me, and waited for me. Even when I had spent my entire life pretending he wasn't real, and now here I was, out of time, out of chances, and yet he didn't turn me away. He looked at me, not like a stranger, not like someone who was disappointed or angry, but like someone who had always loved me. His eyes, I'll never forget them. There was no human emotion that could hold what was in his gaze. It wasn't just compassion, it was fire. It was depth, it was eternity, looking directly into me, and not flinching at what it found. His eyes held justice and mercy at the same time. And they didn't just see me, they understood me. He finally spoke. Not with thunder, not with a booming, echoing voice. His words were calm, gentle. But when he spoke, the entire atmosphere responded like creation itself bowed to the sound of his voice. "You were made for more than what you chased," he said. Just that, and instantly my whole life flashed before me, not as a review, but as a realization. Every hour I had spent worrying about money, about status, about what people thought of me, every time I numbed my emptiness with distractions, every time I brushed off that inner pull, that subtle invitation to turn and seek him, it all rose up at once, and I felt it like a weight I had been carrying without knowing. He wasn't accusing me. He was inviting me to see. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but I had no words. My mind raced with thoughts, questions, confessions, but nothing came out. I just wept. Wept from a place I didn't even know existed. It wasn't shame, it wasn't guilt. It was grief for a life spent far from the one I had been made for. I had lived like he was optional, like truth was relative, like eternity was something to worry about later, much later. But there is no later when you're standing face to face with the one who is eternity. Then he stepped closer, not threatening, but powerful. The space between us didn't feel empty. It felt sacred, like even the air was worshiping him. And he said, "I never stopped reaching for you." Those words undid me. I had ignored him, mocked him, dismissed him, and still he reached through every season, through every moment of silence, through every day I lived like he didn't exist. He had never turned away. He began to show me glimpses of moments in my life, times when I had felt something stir in my heart, but brushed it off, times I had avoided deeper conversations, times someone tried to talk to me about faith, and I changed the subject. Every one of those moments had been him gently knocking, not forcing, just inviting. And every time I turned away, he didn't stop. He waited. And now here I was, finally listening. It wasn't just his words that changed me. It was his presence. It was knowing that no matter how far I had wandered, no matter how hardened I had become, no matter how long I had lived as if I didn't need him, he had still loved me, still wanted me, still died for me. I realized then that everything I had believed about him was too small. I thought Christianity was about rules, about judgment, about checking boxes and going to church. I didn't know it was about this, about knowing him, about walking in truth and love with the one who created me. He didn't show me his scars, but I felt them, not physically, but spiritually. I could feel the weight of what he had done for me on the cross, the cost, the depth of sacrifice. And for the first time, it wasn't abstract, it was personal. He had died for me and I had lived like that didn't matter. I don't know how long I stayed there in his presence. Time had no meaning. All I knew was that everything I had ever needed, everything I had ever longed for was found in him, not in religion, not in effort, but in him. And just when I thought I couldn't handle another second of this overwhelming grace and truth, he said, "There's more I need to show you." And everything shifted again. I had barely begun to breathe in the weight of his presence when something shifted. The silence between us deepened like it had something to say. Jesus didn't need to explain what was happening. I knew I could feel it before it began. The review my life laid bare. Not as a punishment, not as a spectacle, but as a truth I had never dared to fully face. It wasn't like watching a video. It wasn't even like remembering. It was reliving, but through his eyes, through his heart. And what I saw changed me in ways I'm still trying to put into words. It began with what I expected, the obvious moments, the things I knew weren't right. Times I had lied to protect myself. Arguments I escalated when I should have walked away. Decisions made out of pride, selfishness, or fear. I saw how I treated people. I disagreed with the corners I cut when no one was watching. It was all there, crystal clear. I felt every ripple those moments created, not just in my life, but in the lives of others. I saw how small decisions led to unseen pain. How reactions I'd forgotten shaped someone else's path. And yet what shocked me wasn't just those moments. It was what came next. He showed me the in-between moments, the quiet, overlooked decisions I never gave a second thought, the ones I had buried, minimized, or forgotten. a woman crying in her car in a parking lot. I had walked by her without even noticing a coworker who hinted at needing help, but I was too busy finishing a report to care a child in a grocery store who tried to talk to me, and I brushed him off with fake politeness. It wasn't that I was cruel, it was that I was disconnected, numb, and I never realized how much that mattered. Then came the moments where I felt something in my conscience, a nudge, a whisper, but I ignored it. Times I felt like I should reach out, apologize, encourage, speak up, but I didn't. He showed me how many opportunities I had to be kind, to be bold, to be honest, and how many of those I let pass without a second thought. These weren't sins by the world's standards. They weren't scandalous, but they were missed moments to love, missed chances to be a light, missed assignments I never knew I had. And as I watched these moments unfold, I didn't just see what I did. I saw what he saw. He wasn't pointing with accusation. He wasn't shaming me. But in his eyes, every second mattered. Every interaction carried eternal weight. He showed me how even the smallest choices had ripple effects I never imagined. A kind word I withheld became someone's tipping point. A bitter grudge I held quietly affected how I treated people I loved. A time I refused to forgive led to years of distance that never healed. It was all connected. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was forgotten. The most painful part wasn't the mistakes. It was the wasted potential. I saw glimpses of what could have been, what my life could have looked like if I had lived with eternal awareness. I saw the people I could have impacted, the joy I could have walked in, the peace I could have carried, if I had truly known him. If I had lived from the truth of his love instead of running on autopilot. I had always told myself I was a good guy. I wasn't perfect, sure, but I worked hard. I paid my dues. I didn't cheat or steal. I was respectful. But now in the presence of perfection, all of that felt hollow. Not because I was worthless, but because I finally understood that being good by human standards is nowhere near the same as being alive in him. Jesus didn't measure my life by how successful I was, how respected I became, or how little I messed up. He measured it by love, by truth, by how much I had aligned with his heart. And when I looked at my life through his lens, it wasn't full, it was shallow, safe, controlled, and ultimately spiritually blind. I saw how I had built my life around things that didn't last. Comfort, security, opinions, achievements. None of it came with me. None of it mattered here. I had spent so much energy proving myself in a world I couldn't bring with me, and now standing before the one who gave me life, I realized I had never truly lived it for him. I had been surviving, existing, coasting, but not living, not the way I was meant to. And yet, even as the weight of all this settled on me, he never looked away. Jesus stood there the whole time, not turning his back, not shaking his head, just standing with me, present, unmoving. And more than anything else, loving. The love didn't disappear when the truth came out. It deepened. It became more real. Because he wasn't loving some polished version of me. He was loving me, the whole me, even the parts I had buried. And then he whispered something that broke me. I didn't want perfection. I wanted your heart. I broke down, not with shame, but with the realization of how much I had missed. All the striving, all the pretending, all the running from him, when all he ever wanted was me. And the tragedy wasn't that I failed. It was that I never even tried to know him. I never gave him space, never invited him in. I lived like he was a stranger, but now I knew. He was the one who knew me best. There were no excuses left, no way to explain it all away. I had been spiritually asleep. Now I was wide awake. Every wall inside me had cracked open. Every lie I believed about what mattered, about who I was, about who he was, it all crumbled under the weight of his truth. And I was finally ready to see what he really wanted to show me. I had seen my life. Now he was about to show me the world, but not the world through my eyes, through his. Without a word, the atmosphere around us began to shift again. The air grew thicker, not with danger, but with meaning, like I was standing at the edge of something vast. And then it happened. I was no longer looking at myself. I was seeing the world, but not like before. It was clearer, sharper. I wasn't looking with human sight. I was seeing through a kind of lens that felt like absolute truth. I could feel his perspective on what I was witnessing. Not judgmental, but heartbroken. The first thing I noticed was the pace. Everywhere, people rushing, moving fast, faces buried in screens, fingers swiping, tapping, scrolling. I saw buses, cars, trains packed with people, bodies present but souls absent. Everyone was connected digitally, but completely disconnected from their own hearts. I saw a man sitting with his family at dinner, staring at his phone while his children sat silently across the table. I saw a woman crying in her bed while the TV played in the background, pretending to comfort her loneliness. I saw teenagers laughing at things they didn't even find funny, just trying to feel something real. Anything. And I understood. This wasn't just distraction, it was spiritual anesthesia. People weren't awake. They were numb, spiritually asleep, while eternity moved all around them. Then I saw the church. Not one building, not one denomination, but many. Some were big, others small. A few were almost empty. I expected to feel comfort when I looked at them. I expected joy, but instead, I felt sorrow. Not everywhere, not in all of them, but in too many. The lights were on, the music was playing, the sermons were polished, but the fire was gone. People were singing with their mouths, but their hearts were somewhere else. I saw preachers more focused on applause than truth. I saw congregations more devoted to comfort than conviction. It wasn't that they didn't believe, it was that they no longer hungered for him. And Jesus spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it struck me like thunder inside. They don't know what time it is. That one sentence shattered me. He wasn't talking about the hour or the calendar. He meant the season, the moment in history, the spiritual hour we are living in. And yet, people were walking through it half asleep, distracted, divided, entertained, but not awake. Then I saw people arguing online, fighting over politics, over opinions, over theology, over everything. So quick to speak, so slow to love. And beneath it all, I felt something dark, a fog, not a physical one, but spiritual, thick, blinding, deceptive, like something was whispering lies into the hearts of people, and they didn't even know they were listening. I saw the enemy working, not with violence, not with horns, not with fear, with distraction, with comfort, with pride. He didn't have to roar, he just had to dull people's attention, convince them that being busy was more important than being present, that being liked was more important than being holy. And it worked. People were too tired to pray, too skeptical to believe, too distracted to see. But in the middle of all that darkness, I saw light. Small lights, quiet but steady. I saw a young woman praying in her room at night, tears soaking her pillow. I saw a man in his car during lunch break, reading a worn-out Bible in silence. I saw an older couple handing out food with no cameras, no audience, just love. These weren't loud Christians, they weren't polished, but they were real. And I felt joy rise in Jesus, a kind of deep, pure joy. These, he said softly, are the ones who know me. These are the ones who are watching. Then he showed me something even more sobering. People on the edge. People who were close to waking up. Some had been hurt by the church, others misled by false teaching. Many had grown cold, not out of hatred, but out of heartbreak, out of burnout, out of disappointment. They weren't anti-God, they were just tired, skeptical, disconnected, but hungry for something real. And he was reaching for them. Through dreams, through quiet moments, through whispered truths in the middle of their chaos. They didn't know it, but he hadn't given up on them. Not even close. I saw the harvest. I saw how many were ready, how many were waiting for something, for someone to wake them up. And I realized I was one of the ones he had awakened. And now I was being sent to awaken others. The air shifted again, not just around me, but within me. It was like time slowed down, then stretched. Something sacred was stirring in the atmosphere. Jesus turned to me and, without a trace of panic or drama in his voice, said, Now I will show you what is coming." The moment he spoke those words, I felt a deep, trembling awareness in my soul. I wasn't afraid, but I knew. This wasn't going to be easy to see. This wasn't theory. It was reality. Future reality. Not just what might happen, but what will happen if people continue sleeping. And then I saw it. It didn't begin with explosions or fire. It began with shaking. Quiet at first, then loud. Not just physical shaking, though I saw that too, but spiritual, global, entire systems trembling, economies teetering, nations rattled from within, people running, not just from danger, but from despair. And over it all, I felt the world gasping for answers. I saw cities under strain, not only from war or disasters, but from hopelessness. I saw people trying harder than ever to control their lives, grabbing at security, money, influence. But none of it could hold. Everything they built began to feel fragile, temporary. Even people who seemed successful began to look hollow inside. And yet I could feel it. This wasn't just judgment, it was invitation. The word came into my spirit like a flame. Birth pains. The shaking wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something deeper, something necessary. And in the middle of that chaos, I saw a question rise in the hearts of millions. Is this all there is? I saw people searching, questioning, wondering about truth, about purpose, about eternity. But then, I saw something darker rise to meet that hunger. Deception. It didn't come with horns, it didn't scream. It came with beauty, with comfort, with logic. I saw leaders rising. Some were politicians, some were religious figures, some were influencers. They all had the same tone, calm, unifying, peaceful, but hollow. Their words soothed, but they didn't heal. Their solutions looked like light, but something behind their eyes felt off, like a curtain hiding something darker. They offered truth without absolutes, peace without surrender, hope without holiness, and people loved it. Crowds gathered, movements formed, messages spread, people cheered for a version of truth that made no demands, a version of faith that asked for no repentance. It looked good, it sounded right, but it wasn't real. And Jesus let me feel what he felt as he watched it all. Sorrow, not rage, not disgust, just a grief so deep it made me want to collapse. Because people weren't rejecting him in anger. They were being led away by something that looked like him, but wasn't. I saw churches split. Some gave in to the pressure. They softened the gospel until it meant nothing. They redefined sin. They preached acceptance without transformation. And slowly the presence of God lifted from those places. But I also saw others stand firm. Quiet churches, hidden communities, house gatherings, people with nothing but a Bible and desperation. They didn't care about being popular. They didn't want to entertain. They wanted him. And I saw the glory of God rest on them. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Healing happened. Deliverance broke out. People wept over sin, not out of guilt, but because they were being made whole. And I realized revival was coming, but not like most people expected. It wouldn't begin on big stages or through celebrity preachers. It would start in the margins, in places of hunger, in living rooms, in prisons, in dorm rooms, in villages, among the poor, among the forgotten, among those who were done playing church. Jesus looked at me again, and this time his voice carried weight like thunder wrapped in love. There will be a divide between those who follow me and those who only say they do. That hit me like a wave. I saw that this wasn't just about politics or culture or theology. This was about allegiance, about hearts, about who would truly follow the Lamb, no matter the cost. And that's when I saw it, a line, not drawn by men, not by denominations, a spiritual line, invisible but absolute. On one side were people who had chosen comfort, popularity, and compromise. On the other were people who had chosen him fully, not perfectly, but fully. I saw them mocked, marginalized, even hated. But I also saw heaven backing them, empowering them, filling them with boldness, compassion, and unshakable joy. They weren't moved by trends. They were moved by the Spirit of God, and I saw light in their eyes. Then Jesus said something I'll never forget. "The road is narrowing." Those words gripped me. He didn't say it to scare me. He said it to prepare me. The days of half-in, half-out faith are ending. The days of Christian in name only are coming to a close. People will soon have to choose truth or comfort, presence or performance, Christ or culture. And in that moment, I understood something deep in my bones. I was seeing the separation of the bride from the crowd. The air shifted again, not just around me, but within me. It was like time slowed down, then stretched. Something sacred was stirring in the atmosphere. Jesus turned to me, and without a trace of panic or drama in his voice said, "Now I will show you what is coming." The moment he spoke those words, I felt a deep, trembling awareness in my soul. I wasn't afraid, but I knew this wasn't going to be easy to see. This wasn't theory, it was reality, future reality. Not just what might happen, but what will happen if people continue sleeping. And then I saw it. It didn't begin with explosions or fire. It began with shaking, quiet at first, then loud. Not just physical shaking, though I saw that too, but spiritual, global. Entire systems trembling, economies teetering, nations rattled from within, people running, not just from danger, but from despair. And over it all, I felt the world gasping for answers. I saw cities under strain, not only from war or disasters, but from hopelessness. I saw people trying harder than ever to control their lives, grabbing at security, money, influence, but none of it could hold. Everything they built began to feel fragile, temporary. Even people who seemed successful began to look hollow inside. And yet I could feel it. This wasn't just judgment, it was invitation. The word came into my spirit like a flame. Birth pains. The shaking wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something deeper, something necessary. And in the middle of that chaos, I saw a question rise in the hearts of millions. Is this all there is? I saw people searching, questioning, wondering about truth, about purpose, about eternity. But then, I saw something darker rise to meet that hunger. Deception. It didn't come with horns. It didn't scream. It came with beauty, with comfort, with logic. I saw leaders rising. Some were politicians, some were religious figures, some were influencers. They all had the same tone, calm, unifying, peaceful, but hollow. Their words soothed, but they didn't heal. Their solutions looked like light, but something behind their eyes felt off, like a curtain hiding something darker. They offered truth without absolutes, peace without surrender, hope without holiness, and people loved it. Crowds gathered, movements formed, messages spread. People cheered for a version of truth that made no demands, a version of faith that asked for no repentance. It looked good, it sounded right. But it wasn't real, and Jesus let me feel what he felt as he watched it all. Sorrow, not rage, not disgust, just a grief so deep it made me want to collapse. Because people weren't rejecting him in anger. They were being led away by something that looked like him, but wasn't. I saw churches split. Some gave in to the pressure. They softened the gospel until it meant nothing. They redefined sin. They preached acceptance without transformation. And slowly the presence of God lifted from those places. But I also saw others stand firm. Quiet churches, hidden communities, house gatherings, people with nothing but a Bible and desperation. They didn't care about being popular. They didn't want to entertain. They wanted him, and I saw the glory of God rest on them. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was real. Healing happened. Deliverance broke out. People wept over sin, not out of guilt, but because they were being made whole. And I realized revival was coming, but not like most people expected. It wouldn't begin on big stages or through celebrity preachers. It would start in the margins, in places of hunger, in living rooms, in prisons, in dorm rooms, in villages, among the poor. among the forgotten, among those who were done playing church. Jesus looked at me again, and this time his voice carried weight like thunder wrapped in love. There will be a divide between those who follow me and those who only say they do. That hit me like a wave. I saw that this wasn't just about politics or culture or theology. This was about allegiance, about hearts, about who would truly follow the Lamb, no matter the cost. And that's when I saw it. A line, not drawn by men, not by denominations. A spiritual line. Invisible, but absolute. On one side were people who had chosen comfort, popularity, and compromise. On the other were people who had chosen him, fully, not perfectly, but fully. I saw them mocked, marginalized, even hated, but I also saw heaven backing them, empowering them, filling them with boldness, compassion, and unshakable joy. They weren't moved by trends. They were moved by the Spirit of God. And I saw light in their eyes. Then Jesus said something I'll never forget. The road is narrowing. Those words gripped me. He didn't say it to scare me. He said it to prepare me. The days of half in, half out faith are ending. The days of Christian in name only are coming to a close. People will soon have to choose truth or comfort, presence or performance, Christ or culture. And in that moment, I understood something deep in my bones. I was seeing the separation of the bride from the crowd. What I saw next took my breath away, not because of how violent or dramatic it was, but because of how subtle and spiritual the battle had become. It wasn't like anything I had imagined. It wasn't fire falling from the sky. It wasn't tanks rolling through cities or people screaming in panic. It was quieter, slower, but far more dangerous. It was a battle of truth. I saw people arguing, not just online, but in churches, in homes, in classrooms. But they weren't fighting over sin or holiness or eternity. They were fighting over opinions, over personalities, over movements and slogans and emotions. And under all of it, I could feel something dark feeding it: division. It slithered through conversations. It disguised itself as passion. It wore the clothes of righteous anger. But underneath it all, it was just pride. Pride dressed up as truth. I saw believers attacking each other in Jesus' name. I saw denominations refusing to speak to one another. I saw influencers using the gospel to build their own kingdoms, platforms full of charisma but empty of presence. Jesus looked at me, and I saw his sorrow deepen. They've made my bride a battlefield. That one sentence cut through me like a blade, because I knew what he meant. The church wasn't just under attack from the outside, it was bleeding from within. Not because of persecution, but because of pride. I saw churches more focused on branding than brokenness. Pastors so afraid of offending that they stopped speaking truth. Congregations more concerned with growth than glory. Messages crafted to keep people in seats, not to lead them to surrender. And yet Jesus never looked away. He watched it all, not with rage, not with vengeance, with grief. Real, holy grief. And then he turned to me and said, "The greatest threat to my church has never been the world. It has always been within." I wanted to fall to my knees again. I wanted to cry out, to plead, to ask him to fix it all. But he wasn't finished showing me. He showed me leaders. Some I recognized, some I didn't. Men and women who once started with pure hearts, but had drifted, slowly, quietly. They didn't fall into scandal. They fell into applause, into comfort, into fear of man. They still quoted scripture, still wore robes, still said his name, but they no longer carried his presence. And yet, there was a remnant. I saw them, a people hidden in plain sight. Not on stages, not verified, not famous, but burning. Grandmothers who prayed through the night, young people fasting without telling anyone, pastors of small churches who preached with tears instead of polish, worship leaders who cared more about reverence than rhythm. They were everywhere, in cities, in villages, in jungles, in prisons, in basements. They weren't looking for influence, they were looking for him. And I saw heaven pour out on them. I saw miracles, healings, deliverance, not for show, not for money, but because God was with them. Jesus turned to me again, and his voice was steady and full of fire. The remnant is rising. I saw gatherings in living rooms. No lights, no fog machines, just voices crying out in unity. I saw children praying with such boldness that adults fell to their knees. I saw men repenting openly. I saw marriages restored, addicts set free, skeptics surrendering. There were no programs, no five-step plans, just Jesus, present, powerful, real. This wasn't revival as the world expected. This wasn't revival for the world. This was revival from heaven. It didn't need approval. It didn't wait for permission. It began in hunger, and it spread like wildfire, spirit to spirit, house to house, heart to heart. And I knew this was the move we had all been praying for. But so few were prepared for. Because it didn't come through power, it came through purity. It didn't flow through platforms. It flowed through prayer. Jesus showed me churches that had once been cold, suddenly trembling with his glory, because one person decided to seek him in secret. He showed me schools being awakened, not through programs, but through students who refused to compromise. He showed me prisons filled with worship, hospitals overwhelmed by supernatural healing, neighborhoods transformed, not by outreach events, but by love. And then he said something that will stay with me forever. I do not need crowds to move. I need hearts. That's when it hit me. Everything he had been showing me wasn't just a warning. It was an invitation. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was trying to send me. There was still time. There was still a window. And that window wasn't for the famous. It wasn't for the polished. It wasn't for the perfect. It was for the willing to surrender, willing to speak, willing to carry his heart, even when it cost them everything. Jesus turned to me, eyes burning with urgency, and said, tell them, tell the ones who are ready but asleep, tell them I'm still here. Tell them to rise. The moment Jesus said, tell them to rise, everything around me stilled, not in fear, not in finality, but in holy tension. It was as if heaven itself held its breath, waiting to see what the church, what we would do next. Then he spoke again. But this time, his voice wasn't just speaking to me, it was echoing far beyond me. Now I will show you what is still to come. What came next wasn't filled with chaos or fire. It was a choice, written across the sky, across time, across every heart that would ever beat. I saw two paths, one glowing with life, narrow, humble, lined with broken people holding on to truth. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't easy, but it was real. I saw unity. I saw love that defied logic. I saw a church stripped of ego, status, and brand. I saw the remnant standing like warriors, not in armor, but in surrender. The other path was wide, beautiful on the outside, impressive, comfortable, but beneath its surface it was hollow. I saw people clapping, nodding, preaching even, but their hearts were far from him. I saw religion without intimacy, performance without presence, conviction traded for relevance, truth diluted until it no longer pierced the soul. And I realized we weren't just drifting toward the end, we were choosing it. I saw the church at a crossroads, not divided by theology or denomination, but by hunger. Some would wake up, others would sleep deeper. Some would burn with holy fire, others would settle for flickering candles that never changed a thing. And then I saw something I didn't expect. A word, one single word. It hung over both paths, burning with glory, too bright to ignore. Choice. It pulsed like a heartbeat, like the voice of heaven whispering to every soul, every leader, every generation. You must choose. Not later, not someday. Now Jesus turned to me again, his face steady, his eyes locked into mine. And he said, this is not a prophecy of fear, it is a plea of love. The door is still open, the hour is late, but I am still here. I am still calling. I broke again. There was nothing in me that could stand under the weight of that kind of love. A love that doesn't give up, even when we do. A love still reaching for people who've ignored him, mocked him, betrayed him, used his name but never knew his heart. I asked, almost in a whisper, "Is there still hope?" And he smiled, not the smile of comfort, but of confidence. There is always hope where there is repentance. There is always revival where there is hunger, but they must return. They must return to me. Then I saw it, one last vision. A church on fire, not burning down, burning alive. A global bride purified, unified, radiant, without celebrity, without competition, without walls. People worshiping not for spectacle, but out of desperation. Preachers who feared God more than people. Teenagers who prayed with more faith than theologians. Elders weeping over altars. Children prophesying. Nations trembling. Not from war, but from wonder. And I heard his voice again. This is what I died for. This is what I'm returning for. Then everything began to fade. The visions dissolved. The sounds quieted. The atmosphere thinned. He turned to me one final time and placed something deep into my spirit. Not a scroll, not a symbol, but a weight, a holy assignment. You must go back, he said, and tell them what you've seen. Not just with words, but with your life. And I knew my time in that realm was over.